I'm sure that you've had an experience with show and tell, perhaps, in your childhood. And I certainly recall the constant question you had as a kid growing up, what do you want to be when you grow up? And more often than not, that conversation was about what career choice you were going to have. And I can remember that all of my guys in my class wanted to be firemen, policemen, emergency personnel, or a great athlete, or some kind of other celebrity. And all the girls wanted to be successful in their careers, and of course maybe later have a great companion in life and all those things. The interesting thing was that all of us wanted to be something that mattered, something that made a difference, and frankly, something that would be beneficial, that we would all have lives better than our parents perhaps, that we would be wealthy and famous and known more often than not. I'd never heard a single one talk about, I can't wait to be the drug dealer. I can't wait to commit insurance fraud. I absolutely can't wait to be put in prison. We all wanted good things. How does this happen? How does it move? No one plans to end up in these bad situations or conditions. And they're not necessarily preordained, but they are likely in some senses given what happens in life. Rarely do we ever end up at a wrong place because of a single bad decision. If we look closer to the story of how someone ended up in the bad place, and unfortunately we tend to categorize them as they've always been that way, when the truth is much more muddy than that. It's clearer than that, truthfully, that it came over a matter of time. That more often than not, it began with a step in the wrong direction, dealing with a crisis in life or a consequence with a quick but rather poor solution, wanting to make a whole lot of money quickly and doing it with a less than legal sense. Coping with loneliness by spending hours online in chat rooms or other seedier places on the internet. Coping with boredom by binging on a TV series, losing your job because you consistently can't show up for work. Coping with despair through the promises of first over-the-counter pain relievers and then less than over-the-counter painkillers or worse. Coping with loss through eating, opening a door and shutting it often, perhaps one marked refrigerator, filling a void in our life with what can be good, but done incessantly leads to consequences. We read just a portion today of the story of Samson, and I encourage you to read all 4 chapters. They're rather short chapters in the book of Judges, chapters 13 through 17 of the story of Samson. You may be familiar with Samson and strength, and perhaps the other association being Delilah. I can share with you that one of the first confusing things I had about studying the Bible was encountering this story with the Old English King James Version and being utterly confused when it describes a scene where Samson takes the jawbone of an ass. Me understanding ass in a different sense than donkey at the time, and I remember as a child actually grabbing towards my posterior to see if a jawbone was there. And other than politicians, perhaps, there is no such thing as a jawbone in that location. But the book's called Judges, and that's kind of misfortunate because it's actually a translation of Latin for the word that means leader or rescuer. But this book is just a list of occasional leaders sent by God to rescue the suffering Israelites. The Israelites disobey, they get into trouble, they get captured, and then a leader rises up, a savior, some words are said that way, that rescues them for a time. Now, Samuel is said to be among the judges, but as you would see in the pattern of the book of Judges, they keep getting worse as we go on. Samson is the only judge that has no true military conquests ascribed to him. He just has brute strength and a gradual path of destruction that God still yet uses to punish the Philistines. Samson's story is the only one that has a birth story connected to it, and God's promise outlined at the very beginning that if Samson would do 3 things, well, actually avoid 3 things, then God would remain with him. That he would avoid strong drink, that he would not touch corpses, and that he would never have his hair trimmed. He was declared a Nazirite, one set apart for God's good purposes. In chapter 16, we read that Samson goes seeking after female companionship. Samson's name means sunny. It's actually a derivation of the Babylonian name for the sun god. So Sunny has desired previously to this a Philistine woman as a bride. And while he walked through a vineyard, remember that thing about strong drinks? He encounters a lion and kills him barehandedly. And with his father Manoah negotiating the bride's price over a period of time, Samson has to walk back and forth between the two communities, and he discovers that the lion he killed has become a corpse that now has a beehive in it. And he reaches in for it to grab the honey, and he shares it with his parents. And as the bridal preparations begin, he is seen hosting an extravagant party, a party that's described as a drinking party. He's already broken 2 out of the 3 requirements of a Nazirite: not to be around strong drink and not to touch anything dead. When his Philistine bride, his first bride, deceives him to reveal the answer to a riddle among the companions and guests, Samson in a rage kills men and gives what the riddle promised and then abandons his first wife altogether. And it's a tragic story after that. So we encounter Samson walking on a journey for female intimacy here. And he's going to walk from his hometown of Zorah to Gaza, one of the regional Philistine capitals. The Philistines, remember, are enemies of Israel, about 25 miles. Now, someone had some time on their hands to figure out how many steps this would take to walk 25 miles. It would take 56,250 steps, because he didn't get in his Cadillac, Lincoln, Buick, or Chevy to get there. And what happens after this scene, which has an exaggerated sense of the gates being taken 40 miles away from the town? We know Samson falls for Delilah, whose name might mean light, might mean little, could mean flirtatious, and it seems like she's a bit of that character as well. And in the end, she betrays the last part. Well, Samson gives her permission by revealing the secret of his strength being the cutting of his hair, being the way he would be defeated. And of course, he is seized, his eyes are gashed out, and he is a prisoner of the Philistines at the very end. Who did Samson become in all of this? Well, simply he became everything he was not called to be. One bad habit at a time, whether walking through vineyards and then throwing drinking parties, killing an animal and then touching it, even with the donkey incident with the jawbone. He's touching a dead animal again, and then finally being betrayed out of love by having his hair trimmed. It was a journey towards his own destruction. We are always on a road of becoming what we perceive as that's obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying from life. That's really, when we get down to our life's cravings, that's what we're after. And there are many great, good habits that are obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying. But good habits often have this time at the beginning where they're difficult to actually become part of ourselves. With the promise of future good dividends there, the issue is, as we've encountered before, we don't see them sometimes quickly enough. And bad habits often start with an immediate beneficiary, with immediate satisfaction, but end in difficult consequences. Dealing with our stress in the moment through a tobacco product will eventually lead to cancer, one puff, chew, or other means at a time. But when it started, it didn't do that at all. Because we are always going to have these motives as part of our human nature, that we will always want to conserve as much energy as possible because thinking and making decisions is exhausting. We always need to have food and water for our bodily functions to work. We always want to find love and also have the desire to reproduce. We always want to connect and bond with others. We always want to win social acceptance and approval. We want to be seen well by others. We want to reduce uncertainty in our lives, whether through investments or asking Google what we don't know, or watching Jeopardy to bulk up on our trivia knowledge. And we always want to seek some form of status and privilege for ourselves. But in the story of Samson, Samson doesn't really speak to God until the very end, when he's shackled and blinded and asked to stand between two pillars in the middle of a Philistine temple that's full of party goers and executives and kings and rulers of the Philistines, and they are sneering at him to perform things for him, but they have not noticed Samson's hair has grown back. Last week we talked about how to start good habits. Now, this week, of course, we need to discuss how to stop the bad habits. Well, the first thing that we must do to stop a bad habit is to recognize that we have one, to acknowledge it, whether it's a bad attitude we have, or bad usage of our time, or inappropriate use of a substance, recognizing that what we are doing, how we are coping, is not the best way forward, is the first thing to do. And in order for us to break a bad habit, we must make the bad habit less easy to perform. We must make it more difficult to do. And we have two ways to do that. We can remove the cue, or we can interrupt the action, because all habits have the same thing: a cue, an action, and a reward. And bad habits follow the same thing. We need to remove the cue from it. And that's easy. That can be, first of all, your bad habit probably happens at a certain place, doesn't it? You don't tend to go gambling in your living room, short of it being on the phone. You don't tend to do those things. You never overeat at a gym, but you can always overeat at a buffet. You have to go to a place to do the bad thing. You may remove the opportunity of time involved in it. Bad habits always begin at a certain time in our behavior, a certain obvious spot where we're caught when the time is right. Maybe we're bored, maybe we're angry. And that leads us to the other way that bad habits happen. It's our mood. Have you ever thought of halting? Usually our bad habits come in when we're hungry or when we're angry, or perhaps a combination of the two, when we're hangry or when we're lonely or tired. Those should be flags to say, watch it. Or maybe it's a moment, a certain thing that always irritates you, and as soon as that happens again and again, you do exactly the same reaction again and again, a certain pattern with a certain response. Or it's the people you hang around with. Drug dealers tend to hang out with drug dealers. Smokers tend to hang out with smokers. It's who you're around. The closer you are, the more likely you imitate them and what they do. We have three types of people that surround us. The closest, our family and siblings perhaps. The many, our friends, or who we associate with in nearby. And then the powerful, the aspirational, the celebrities that we'd like to imitate. We tend to imitate the interests and hobbies of those we want to become. It's almost impossible for us to go the right direction when we cannot even hang out with the right people. The other ways we can stop this is through interrupting the action. If we miss the cue, then we can change what we do with it. We can, if we oversleep and keep pressing the snooze button, that's simple. Put the alarm clock across the room so you have to get up to stop it. Maybe you need to set some passwords that only some other people know in order to stop you from online purchases or inappropriate viewings, etc. Or perhaps the real necessity in action is to seek professional assistance with it, to seek the professional help, to go to the rehab, to confront your out-of-control addiction. And all addictions are a sign of loss of control. The habits you have today will shape who you will become tomorrow. Do you like the direction your habits are taking you? I wonder. We don't know. We're given pretty matter-of-fact statements here in Judges that one day Samson just went from Zorah to Gaza to meet a prostitute. But it only would have taken one step out of the 56,250 to make a world of difference in where Samson ended up in Gaza. There is power in telling yourself, no, we don't do that anymore, in response to those self-destructive urges that you can recognize as coming to you. There is always a way out. You are on a journey of becoming who you are called to be by God or by whatever you've made your God. The small actions done consistently are necessary for who you really are. Athletes always work out. Musicians always practice. Godly people always pray. Ambassadors and followers of Christ always serve, always give, always love others as much as themselves. Those who really don't want to become that stop doing any effort towards becoming it. The end of the Samson story is tragic, but in the end, Samson is given one last time by an urgent plea of God-given strength to overcome and condemn Israel's enemies. The faults and weaknesses added up, but God overcame for his own purposes. We experience God's unconditional love, but unconditional love does not mean unconditional acceptance of bad behavior. But you always have a way to leave bad things behind. There is always an alternative. You just need to acknowledge, alter the direction, and begin in a new direction. Today is just as good of a day to begin the journey. First stop, then begin elsewhere, one step at a time.